good.
Now, if I lose my credentials over this, we'll have a different conversation.
I'll give you mine.
So
you're gonna have a stack of them sitting on your desk as everyone's
Bill,
like, no, thank
Bill,
you.
let's be honest. I don't think you want Dustin's credentials. Let's just be real.
I'm just saying, if that makes you lose your credentials, then I should have lost mine years ago.
No, well, like I said, we're all a work in progress, right? Welcome back to the Ministry Without Hating It podcast, a ministry of Odyssey Haven coaching and counseling dedicated to the pursuit of answering the question, is it possible to do ministry without hating it? We have a theory that it just might be. My notes say pre-set up nonsense after at this point. And I think Brenton mimicking me through the whole thing. I do have a video. I can see you. That's the pre-set up nonsense. And he muted himself, which is fantastic because that's the second time, Dustin.
Yeah, I have done it.
Second time.
Done it yet. I'm so excited right now.
So I hit the button, but because I was pushed on another screen, it wasn't actually working on this one.
I tried to use that last time, remember? And you guys said, "Oh, we still have the same microphone. This works."
Oh, this is
yeah.
This is fantastic. And he actually, listener, just a little behind the scenes, we had an over-under for Dustin on how many times, based on the last episode, that he would actually hit mute and start talking. And the money line was 2, right? I went over and I busted for sure. Our friend Brenton, guess how many he did?
Dose.
He went 2.
That's
and guess
2
how many
for our
times he's done it?
people.
He's done it twice. So it's a little bit of a comeuppance, I think is what they call that.
It's just keeping me humble, man.
So
Keeping me humble. I don't know everything.
Speaking of humble, that's something that comes in a lot. Did you see that segue? That was a pro move right there. Thank you.
How long have you been doing this?
Well,
you're not supposed to talk about it. You're just supposed to keep going.
2 years. No.
You don't need to point out your success. You just keep rolling with it.
All right. So talking about humility. Oh,
this is good.
this has to be fun. No, this is all staying in. This has to be fun, or otherwise we don't do it. Man, we just had a conversation with a man who has had a lot of experience, a lot of life experience, a lot of ministry experience, and is just so humbled by it. Not once in this interview, you guys will see, does he come from a place of I'm the expert, or this is expertise, and you just need to take notes. It's very much, this is how I learned it, and this is what I went through, and this is what I got wrong. And I am just so grateful for this conversation. I know you guys are as well.
Yeah, it was really good. And you'll want to save it on your desktop.
On your desktop.
There we go.
Come back later.
That's what they call a tease. We'll just let that one go. So anyway, I think we've had enough of the pre-set up nonsense, and it gets better and better each time. And so without further ado, we are excited for you and hope you enjoy our conversation with our friend, Pastor Bill Campbell. Well, Pastor Bill Campbell, it's good to have you on the Ministry Without Hating It podcast. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's my privilege.
We'll see. That's the running joke, is we'll see.
We never know for sure.
Right?
I believe I say that in almost every episode. We'll see. So, all right. We like to start off by asking questions that have nothing to do with ministry, but need to be asked anyways.
Yeah.
So your preferred snack type, salty, sweet, savory?
My problem is I'm a junk food guy. I like it all.
Okay.
Go to Culver's and get a concrete mixer.
Oh, wow.
Peanut butter, a Butterfinger,
I like
that's
that.
a happy day. Bag of Cheetos, not the puffy ones, but the real ones.
Yes, the real ones, exactly. Do you like the flaming ones, or do you just like the regular?
Yeah, they're actually pretty good too.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the greatest hamburger in the world is a Whataburger.
Oh,
can't find them up here.
Wow.
But,
shots fired a little bit, but Whataburger is close. It's close. It's no In-N-Out.
Yeah, it's not In-N-Out.
Yeah, no, I know that. I know the In-N-Out folks, so that's.
Yeah, we are very zealous about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's okay. So, all right. So basically anything.
Yeah.
Anything, just stuff in there.
If you can
junk food, I'm good.
If you can eat it, then it's good.
Absolutely.
And
It's
bonus,
a real challenge.
good
challenge when you're married to someone who's all about whole plant food. So we just both agree to disagree.
Say, I'll pray for you.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, the trick could be though too is if you tell her, so well, we can fry anything, then it adds it that much better. So
yeah, I do bring her over to the dark side from time to time. So she is susceptible. So
that sounds like marriage. Yep, that's good. All right, very good. All right, so if you had your own late night talk show, who do you invite as your first guest?
You know, this is kind of a blast from the past.
Okay.
I think I'd bring Bill Clinton.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did not see that coming. Please continue.
No.
Please continue.
Bill Clinton is an interesting guy.
Okay.
Because, you know, he grew up single mom, and he grew up in a Baptist church. And even when he was governor of Arkansas, he would go to the North Little Rock First Assembly, big church, on Sunday nights and play the saxophone in their orchestra. And then he would bring Jaron Davis, that wrote the old song, We're Standing on Holy Ground, bring him to the White House to do concerts. And actually had him come sing that at his mother's funeral. So there's this strange God factor in his life. And yet he's also most famous for the dress with a stain on it. You know, I mean, basically, he's not exactly the epitome of moral value. But if I was married to Hillary, I probably have issues too. So you know what do you say?
So people either turned you up just now or turned us off. One of the
yeah. You know, I'm probably not supposed to say that
because you know there is no moderate in political anything anymore. It's just either you're on or you're off. That's it. Wow.
But anyway, he honestly was a good president in a lot of ways. Even though he's not my political party, I still admire some of what he did and some of how he did it. And yet he was such a strange mix. So I think it'd just be fun to do an interview with him.
Wow. I almost don't know where to go from.
I didn't see that happening.
That was awesome. All right. So what are you reading or listening to right now?
I just finished a book, From Strength to Strengths, by a guy named Arthur Brooks.
Okay.
And it's basically about the difference in fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. And kind of his premise is that in our younger adult life, we operate out of fluid intelligence where our creativity comes from. And so, ironically, a great example of this is in professional sports. You know, you look and by the time a guy's 35 or 40, generally he's in decline and retiring. Tom Brady's a rare exception to have played as long as he did. And his contention is that in business, in any area, in sports, whatever you're achieving, that our highest performance years are in our 20s and 30s. And it's a curve. And then even he cites people like Darwin, who were really famous for what they did, that some of what they did was in their early 20s and 30s, and they spent the rest of their lives trying to match what they had done and couldn't. And he says it's because your fluid intelligence peaks. And that you need to also learn how to tap into the crystallized intelligence as you get older.
Wow.
And that's basically wisdom you've learned from the experiences of life and what you did earlier. And so now you operate more from that understanding and how you do things. I just think it's a great, you know, I think for me as an older guy now, trying to sort out how do I do this now, it's just been very helpful. I just think it's a neat book.
Not to jump ahead a little bit, but I'm curious. So you read the book and you said, you know, for you it was interesting. What's the, like, and I mean, we're going to talk about this in just a little bit. You know, you are somebody that has a lot. I was just telling AJ before, you have a lot of experience. Like you're a guy who's seen some things and you're still going at it. And so when you read something like that, I mean, how does that translate to where you're at personally and even moving forward?
Well, there's ways that it's an affirmation because it makes me feel like that some of what I do addresses what he says you should be doing, but it's also a challenge because, you know, am I really doing the maximum of what could be to do this well? And am I kidding myself? Do I think I'm leading or am I just out for a walk in the park? And, you know, I think you have to constantly evaluate that to still be effective and still be able. And I think because everything changes so fast, you know, the rate of change is so exponential these days that you really have to pay attention, because what seems to be really with it is totally not the thing anymore. And so I think there's a lot of challenge in it.
Yeah. See, guys, this is why we start off with these mindless questions, because they always end up in something deep, just like this. Especially when you've got such a deep subject here with this guy. This is awesome. So, okay, so then what is, maybe it's coupled with this, or maybe it's not. What's some of the best advice that you've ever been given?
There's an old guy in my church. He's like 85, very successful in business, has a manufacturing business, very wealthy. And I met him when I first moved to Fort Wayne, and we've just been dear friends. He's a great part of our church. I had breakfast with him this morning. And early on, one of the first times I sat down with him, I was kind of complaining about a couple of things I was dealing with. And he reminded me of the scripture to not be weary in doing good. And every time I'm with him, sooner or later in the conversation, that verse will come up. And it's fun every once in a while to turn it on to him when he's kind of complaining about something he's dealing with. But I think that's very important in the world we live in, that you've got to keep, how am I doing the right things, the things that matter to God, and how do I not get weary in that, because we live in a battlefield. And I think that's the other thing. How do you not forget that as long as you're in this world, you're a part of the eternal battle between good and evil. And so how do you keep doing the right thing when it's constantly pulling on you to not do the right thing?
Yeah.
So I think that's been very valuable to me, to not forget that.
So what then? We'll wrap it up with this. I can't wait to actually get into the deep stuff, because I feel like you've already gone there for us. What are you finding exciting right now, or what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I'm at that age where you're wanting to finish well, where a lot of the guys who are in this community that have been pastors that are my age have retired. And I also watch some other old guys that should retire and they haven't. I don't want to be one of those guys, but I also still feel like there's some things that I'm supposed to do before I shift roles. And then last year kind of occurred to me just a little over a year ago when I got asked to become regional pastor for Indiana, Michigan, and Chicago for Foursquare. Because frankly, I'm not real into the church governance side of things, and don't always like that element of it. So I've never wanted to do that sort of thing. But it became almost like I sensed a God call to what can I do that could be helpful, that would be beneficial. And so I'm excited about some of what's starting to happen with that, and opportunities and people that have been, opportunities. Even the meetings that we were in a few weeks ago where I spent time, Chad, with you and Brenton, that was just really a great time for me to hear y'all's hearts and to see. I'm excited about what y'all are doing. So it's just really a neat time of what does it look like to build something bigger than who you are, and to help also be an encouragement to others that are going to do things in ministry that you're not going to do, but maybe you can be constructive in helping that happen. So to me, it's an exciting time.
What, just for those that maybe don't understand or are familiar with the Foursquare landscape, we'll just say it that way, shifting or whatever, but what does the regional, I know what it is, but what do you see the regional pastors you just talked about, and why is that exciting to you? What is that, and why is it exciting?
Foursquare, and I think this is not just true with Foursquare. I think all denominations are grasping for how to be relevant, because the world's changed so much, and so many times the culture of the church doesn't reflect a lot of great interaction with the culture of the world and our nation. And so the regional pastor to me is an assignment that Foursquare is doing to try to give support to pastors. And in the structure, you have the district supervisor, associate supervisor over this large geographical district. And then you have regional pastors over normally around 50 churches. And then you have area pastors. So there's like 3 area pastors that are hands-on. And honestly, the area pastors to me are really a pastor to the pastors.
Yeah.
And then the regional pastor is more in the strategic planning and administrative And if there's an issue that needs to be addressed, how do we do that? If there's a way we need to come alongside, how do we do that? And then work with the area pastor and the local pastor, and then work as kind of an extension of the district supervisor and associate supervisor, more down into the weeds of things than the associate or district supervisor may be dealing with. And so it lets the area pastor be able to be the true pastor, because if someone's struggling to do their responsibilities as a regional pastor, you're the one that's going to probably be coming alongside them and pointing out that something needs to be different. And so you're more in a corrective role sometimes, but you're also should be doing it in a supportive role. And then you're also looking at where are places that we need new churches. How will we get new churches? How do we develop new leaders? And how do we change the concept of what does a church look like? What's a missional community as opposed to just a traditional church? And so to me, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what you're doing as a regional pastor.
So you're really shepherding leaders and pastors.
Yes.
And I've kind of seen that shift. I want to maybe, as we pivot out of this, maybe ask this question a little differently than what I normally do. Because normally we just come right out and say, when I say the word ministry, what does that mean? I wonder if maybe, especially knowing, as you've seen a shift in you, and even like you've come new revelations, talk to us about what it is now, but what it has maybe evolved from for you, knowing the history and experience that you bring to this.
Yeah, most of my years in ministry have been during the segment of time that the attractional church was huge. From the days of when Cho in Korea became known with the world's largest church, and then the whole Willow Creek syndrome and all the churches that have come out of seeker-sensitive movement, and then how traditional churches suddenly woke up and said, hey, we may need to catch up with what they're doing. And in the process, then we got caught between how do you relate to people who are non-churched as opposed to traditionally how you would have done it. And so we've fallen all over ourselves trying to not look like a church, and done some pretty pathetic things through the years to do that. And I think what to me is great is I see us moving back more to where it's authentic, and yet authentic with sensitivity.
Oh, okay.
So that there is what was attempted in the attractional church to not just be offensive to an unbeliever. That awareness is still there, but at the same time, not being ashamed to say, hey, I am a believer and this is what it means. So I think ministry has shifted. I think the other thing is a better understanding of our identity as ministers has been in the position. And I think there's a better understanding that we have this treasure in us, this life of Christ Paul talked about in Corinthians, and that what we do is live to emanate the life of Christ. And so ministry isn't vocational. Ministry is actually who we are as a believer.
That's good.
And if it happens to be something that then turns into a vocation, wonderful. But my identity is not in the vocation. My identity is in Christ. And I think the more we can get vocational ministers to think that way, the healthier it's going to become. A title I hate is the word reverend.
Oh.
And when I was young going into ministry, man, I knew guys that had been in ministry, and it was a big deal that you called them reverend whoever. And a lot of them were jerks. And I thought, man, I just hate the thought that this is what people think, because again, it was their identity. And so I'm cool with people calling me a pastor, but I don't need them to, because that's not where identity is. It's assignment. It's not identity. And so ministry to me is so much bigger than what the vocational assignment is. And if you don't learn how to be a minister without the assignment, you probably won't do real well with the assignment.
Bill, I have a question for you. Just leading from that, you said earlier about being relevant. So how do you take your that perspective of what ministry is now, in your opinion, but then still being relevant at the same time?
I think we need to have better awareness of culture, and when I say that, not the understanding that there are many cultures in whatever community you live in. We at some level have a national culture, but to assume that everybody who lives in the U.S. thinks the same way, they don't. That's why our politics are so crazy right now. And so you have the culture that's a generalized culture, but in that are many other cultures that relate to ethnicity, relate to gender, relate to socio status, professional status, that relate to sexual identity. And so if we don't have awareness of the culture someone is driven by, and then we have our culture as a church, and we are trying to force our culture on other cultures in a way that becomes offensive to them, we're never going to help them. And yet we shouldn't be ashamed of our culture. We should learn how to reach out first and accept them as a person in the culture they're in before we try to influence them by what our culture may offer for their lives.
I think something that you were saying even a little bit before was, not love being called reverend. When someone just comes up to me and says, "Hey, pastor," I'm like, "Do you even know my name?" Mm-hmm. And how, if you don't really know, then you only see me in a vocation. I think that goes back to just what you're saying. If we don't get to know people by name, by who they are, and we just know them by what we are, quote unquote, against, that creates division rather than bringing people to a place of understanding where the truth can even be spoken in a way that would bring life.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not to sidetrack too much, you guys keep using the word reverend, and it reminds me, I was in cemetery one time with Lindsay.
Cemetery?
And cemetery. We've this is a fun side note. We used to go on dates there. I'm just going to leave it at that. That's what we did, and get over it. Whatever. However, there was one I'll never forget in Boulder City, Nevada, because we were also visiting my grandparents' grave. So thank you very much. And they, it just said on it, all that said on the tombstone was "The Reverend," in like big block letters, "The Reverend." And I told Lindsay, I said, I think that'll do for me. That'll be good. So
maybe he was a WWE wrestler or something.
Not to go against your definition, Bill, because I say this in that for me it's not running away from the title per se, because I don't mind stepping into I love how you unpacked the assignment versus the vocation. That was so well said. I also, though, too, I want to be on a relational level with people where it's, if we're out and about, you know what I mean? Yep. Oh, this is just Chad, that kind of a thing. So I totally get that. But having known you for some time now, I think it's, when we moved back to the Midwest, you were one of the first leaders, because we lived in Indiana at the time, that I got to meet. And one of the things I've always admired, and I have very clear memories, I put this in the notes, of you sharing at pastors' conferences. And anytime you've shared, it's I don't feel it's ever been from a place of I'm an expert and I've got this figured it out, but that it's actually, these are the things that we learned the hard way. Like I think you mentioned, like we fell on our face or something like that earlier. But what I've always appreciated is that you always use that. And even if you mentioned those meetings that we were at just a few weeks ago, you shared a devotional about how you were almost disobedient in something that the Lord was saying, and how you had to learn the hard way in that, but that it's always brought you to this place because you've allowed yourself to grow and learn from that to new flourishing, in a lot of ways. And so I'm curious if maybe you can share some of the major revelations that you have gained in those moments.
Yeah. For me personally, a huge deal in my life was as a young pastor. My first marriage was a lot of struggle, and we were pastoring a church that was just a struggling church. And the culmination of that was we ended up divorced, and I ended up with the church closing. And at that time, I was in a denomination that if you were divorced and remarried, then there was no room for you in the ministry. And so I just kind of stepped away thinking I'd never be back in ministry again, but knowing that I still wanted to know and serve God. So I just kept myself open. And then God ended up opening up amazing ministry opportunities inside of that world. But I think it was through the reversal that actually God opened greater opportunities, and it gave me a whole different perspective of humanity and what God wants of us, and to recognize that a lot of the legalism that tends to creep into a lot of evangelical churches, especially conservative evangelical churches, that a lot of that legalism is so unhealthy. And when I realized that God does forgive you for divorce and there is life after that, then I think I'm far better at relating to people who've been divorced than I was before.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not as judgmental.
Yeah.
You know, it just it changed my perspective that God loves people where they're at. And you know, I'm not a universalist by any means, but I do believe that God's grace is amazing, and that I don't think it's just sloppy grace, but I think it is far greater than we know how to extend as people.
Wow, that's good. I do my best when you say sloppy to not go sloppy wet kiss.
Yeah.
my least favorite worship line there. I didn't mean to break up the moment.
So
I really appreciate that, though. What were you going to say, Brenton?
Oh, that seems a lot like, you know, the way Paul says, you know, as we've healed from that's how we heal others, you know, out of the grace that we've been given. Now we know, so we can now extend that to somebody else.
Yeah.
It seems like that's how we're supposed to live. Like,
I think the challenge is, do you minister out of your pain or out of your healing?
Oh,
I've known people that have become bitter, and so they still believe they're supposed to do ministry, and they're very engaged, but their ministry, if you spend much time with them, you realize it's coming out of that pain, and it's not healthy at all. On the other hand, if you've come through a place where God has done some amazing healing in your life, you have the sensitivity that created, but now you're able to minister out of a healthy perspective, not out of a wounded perspective.
That's good.
And I think that's another big piece of the puzzle for how we do ministry.
Yeah. We're doing a thing with Dr. Henry Cloud right now on changes that heal.
And name drop.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, right now media, it's for everybody can watch that.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. You said you're just doing something.
Yeah.
With
No, he comes and we have personal. No,
it's wonderful. It's great.
So I would love that, by the way. But he talks
shameless ask. Keep going.
Yeah. He's next on our list.
How many more times can I interrupt Brenton? Keep going.
So, one of the things that he was talking about, though, was just, you know, it's not the first step in the program to go heal others. That's step 12. Step 1 is process and do all of the work that happens in the transition. So, and then after all of that, then we have the capacity to do, you know, to lead and to bring healing to other people and relate, and all comes out of humility. So.
Well, and Bill, I want to draw back to, I'm curious if you could pull this out a little bit more for us. You know, that word, it sounds like it's a reoccurring thing of, you know, the do not be weary in the doing good, and how that relates to, you know, what you just said, as far as, you know, my ministering out of, you know, pain or healing. So how has that played out practically for you, having, you know, to walk through pain, but then also, you know, the pain that you didn't ask for or didn't expect, you know what I mean? How does that play out in far as, you know, not growing weary and doing the actual good?
Yeah. I think because we live in a culture that's very self-oriented and very self-focused, that it's easy for us. It's all about me.
Yeah.
And I'm not the best counselor in the world because I tend to have the attitude of suck it up, buttercup. Yes, and so to me, I think one of the things is that when you're in ministry, you signed up for this, and do you really believe that God is sufficient and that he'll give you the sufficiency? So there's times when you're in a season with pain But when it's time that you're on, you actually operate out of his life in you, and you don't let the pain dominate. You allow the Spirit of God to flow through your spirit, even though you're still in pain. And if you can't do that, it's time to step aside long enough that somebody else can do what needs to be done, so that you don't do damage.
Yeah, that's good.
In what you're doing. And a lot of people, in sharing, they're actually throwing up on people because they're processing their own stuff. And I think you have to be careful, because I think you've got to have authenticity and tell stories and share your story, but you have to be careful that it doesn't become a way that you're actually venting, and that you're actually getting your healing because you're able to talk about it. And I think it's sometimes, becoming a believer doesn't mean that you park your brain. Isaiah says, "Come now, let us reason together." So yes, I operate in the Spirit, but my brain doesn't have to be parked to operate in the Spirit.
I'm taking a moment because that's, I don't want people to miss what you just said, because it'd be really easy to just go, oh yeah, kind of gloss over. But like, having even the self-awareness to be able to go, something's not right in me. That a lot of leaders do lack. And then there's the the feeling of failure. Well, I have to step back, or I have to step aside. What would you speak to those spaces?
I think one of the things, and when I went through divorce, I immediately plugged into a large church that I respected the pastor, and it was a part of the denomination that I had stepped out of leadership in. But I knew that he held a little bit different view. He was really big on restoring people that had had some kind of failure in their life. So I knew it was a good, safe place for me. And so I just basically went in and said, God, I'm going to go here. I'll be involved at what level, but I'm not going to seek anything. But if you open up opportunity that I need to serve in, I'll serve. And within a very short time, this was back in the 80s when single adult ministry was the buzz thing in a lot of churches. You had to have a single adult ministry for all the freaks that were single. And basically, the first thing I got offered to be a part of was that leading in single adult ministry. I thought, dear God, I'm already got my own problems. I don't want to be with a bunch of other freaks that are worse than I am. But then I remembered God had opened the door. And so I decided, okay, I told you I'd walk through the door. And then I would consciously, as I engaged with it, I would do some soul searching. Where am I coming from and what I'm doing with this, to try to stay. And so, in other words, it isn't just showing up, it's showing up and processing things, realizing you don't park your emotions either, but you don't leave the emotions in the driver's seat. They're a passenger in the car, they're not the driver. And so you express your emotions and you find appropriate ways to do that. So that I had people that I trusted that I could go to during that season. And then I also did move into, now I'm functioning in a role of being Christ hand extended to these others that I'm ministering to. Now this is a time to be in that phase of things. And so I think you have to sort through, when you're in ministry, where's the point at which where you suck it up, buttercup, and do what needs to be done, but you also don't stuff what needs to be dealt with. You just deal with it to the appropriate person at the right time.
That's good. Yeah. That's solid practical advice right there. Is it?
I think it's important because, I grew up in the church era where like pastors never really shared anything. And so it was like this idea of like pastors are perfect. And I think that's why we got some of the pastoral issues that we've had in the past and things like that. It was like, well, they're just perfect and there's no way I'm going to be, and we pedestal them and things like that. And so, but I think we're also going into the opposite direction of where they're like, well, I'm just going to show you everything that I'm struggling with. And people are like, well, why?
And create a ministry out of it.
Yeah. Like
right? a platform sometimes.
Like, why are you even doing this? So I think it's good to, as we say all the time, like balance and all of those things, that balance of there's times that I share things. I don't share all the things. I don't share all the details of the things, but also serving out of that, that serving through the pain, I think is important, but also serving through the healing is important as well.
Yes. Yep.
Well, and just to maybe not to belabor this some more, but like speaking to your resiliency within ministry, and even the do not weary in doing good. If you had to, I mean, maybe unpack that a little. I wouldn't want to say like, if you had to sum it up, that's what I was trying to say, but I don't think it's a summation type. What do you attribute that to, or what is when you hear "do not weary in doing good"? How do you not hear that ironically, right? And go, all right, that's the thing I got, or start to get turned off by it. Like, how have you been able to attribute and continue to stay resilient within what you're doing?
Well, I think part of it is, where's your personal faith? Do you really believe that God can do anything? And do you really believe that God wants to be in personal relationship with you?
Yeah. That's good.
And do you really believe that all things work together for good to them who love God and are called according to his purpose? And so you live life from an understanding of the thing that's just devastated me is a frame in a motion picture. It's not the final picture. It's not the final scene, because our lives, the journey of our life is a movie, if you would. It's a continuous rolling of multiple frames. And so that what I learn is, if I really believe that God is all things work together for good, and we live from victory to victory to victory. If I'm having a really bad day today, this isn't the final chapter. Don't write it or live it as if it is, so that you hold on to the faith that there is something better that's coming. God has something good for you, and it is going to get there. So you don't get into the full extreme of positive confession world, but you do understand that, yeah, we do have a God who the end results ultimately eternity's in heaven. So it's going to go there. So today I'll have the endurance because today's not the last day. The chapter's not done.
Yeah.
And so I can go, and then truly depending, it's not my strength. How do I draw on the strength of his life that's in me? And constantly believing I have the life of Christ inside of me.
Wow. That's that is a good sobering question of, do I actually believe?
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
actually, do I believe that God is good?
Yeah.
That's a fun one to sit with. Thank you. Go ahead, Brenton. I know you're gonna say something.
I just think of, like, when I hear that, I hear Jesus going to Peter and going, "Do you love me?" And just continually drawing him back, even in every failure, everything. He just keeps going back to him and said,
Yeah.
I love you, Lord, but there's more there.
Mm-hmm.
Keep drawing me out, keep drawing me out, and that's a lifetime of work that God's doing in all of our lives.
Yeah. And that whole scenario, Brenton, is great, because it's interesting, because here Jesus is trying to pull him up, and Jesus is saying, do you love me with the kind of love where I just gave my life for you? And Peter's saying, you're a good buddy to me.
Yeah.
You look at what they actually are responding back and forth. They're doing what we do in America. They use the word love is being used very loosely by Peter, where Jesus is taking it to the depth of what love is. And that's the challenge we have. There's days that I don't have it, and I'm not a bad person just because I had a day where I lost it, and where if I'm driving down the street and I flip someone off, then I don't need to turn my ministerial credentials in.
Depends on the level of which you did the flipping, but maybe. But
exactly, if I ran them off the road with my car, maybe
that's right. If
but
there was an actual crime committed.
Yes. So I think those are and the challenge is, we're a work in progress.
Yeah.
So we're not arrived yet, and yet you can't use that as a cop out for what you need to be responsible for either.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to draw back to what you said too, because I love that of like, well, you did sign up for this. Like, nobody made you. Like, we are called, but did we actually embrace and accept that? And that's a great reminder, even for me, even where I'm at now. Sometimes, like, I can look around and go, well, this is the life that you chose. You chose to follow and call, and that God has blessed that, right? I can honestly
Yeah.
say that. It hasn't been easy, but God has blessed it. And so there might be I need to, pull it. Was it pull up my bootstraps? Is it whatever? I
Yeah.
don't remember the phraseology of. Usually, I'm pretty good at euphemisms. I failed
Yeah.
there. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
To pull it up by your bootstraps is a reality of how we need to live. And we do have to decide, and I think it goes back to this whole concept of testimony. Basically, if you look at testimony without getting into a long discussion of it, testimony kind of means do it again. And so, one of the values of us thinking back where God has helped us in the past, it's a way as we recall that to say, God, I believe that because you came through in that moment, you're going to come through again, so that it causes your faith to be stirred in the middle of the valley.
That's I'm just letting that sit for a second because that Bill, this is so good. Thank you so much. This is so good.
No, this is fun. I mean, it's just kind of neat to watch what God does.
Yeah.
As we let Him shape us.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect way of saying it. If we let that happen, otherwise it will be painful.
Yeah.
So every leader has different challenges and contexts, but maybe give us some of the best practices that you've been able to implement that any leader should be able to also implement.
Yeah, I think a best practice for me has been to try to develop some disciplines and rhythms that I try to practice. And when I say that, for years, I would hear people talk about, in an example, you hear of the great prayer people, who pray 8 hours a day. And frankly, about 10 minutes into prayer, I'm thinking what I need to do after I get done with this. I really have to push myself.
Right.
And finally, one day it dawned on me, I haven't been called to be an intercessor in the way those people have, and that's okay. But I still need some daily discipline of prayer in my life. How do I stay anchored in the Word of God? And literally, I have a whole set of scriptures that I pretty much go through every day, just as reminders to me. These are truths from the Word of God that I live by, and so they help me to set the tone. And then I also try to have people in my life that I trust that will be honest with me, that will speak into my life if there's things that I need to hear, and give them permission to do that, and to also do some form of debriefing from like a church service, things that you're doing, so that there's opportunity to come back through and say, hey, what could have been better? What could have been done differently? How do I do that? And so I think that's important. The actual preaching element, I've always believed, I'm not a deep theologian by any means. I've always believed that the Word of God's practical. And so if what I preach on Sunday morning isn't going to help you live on Tuesday, I probably shouldn't be preaching.
That's good.
So how do I do things that I take the Word of God and make it where it can work in anybody's life if they just apply it? And so I think those are the things that become important to do. And then how do you keep loving people the way you're supposed to? And how do you also check in and maybe have people you trust? What's become toxic with me that I need to get dealt with so that it doesn't get me? My wife is an incredible help to me. And frequently, if I'm going to send an email, especially if I'm responding to something that I'm kind of PO'd about, I actually will run it by her before I actually hit send, because there's been many times that, thank God, she taught me how to send what I was going to send originally, so that that gave opportunity. And so I think, again, don't be in a rush to do things that may need a little time to percolate before you actually implement them. And the same thing is true with great ideas for what you're going to do with some theme you're going to do, or some new way you're going to do ministry. Make sure you've run that by some other people that have good insight. You don't want to do it with dream crushers, but you want to do it with people who are trusted people that help you really know, is this God you're hearing from, or is this just one of your crazy ideas again?
Yeah.
To me, those are all things that have been important to me through the years.
What's interesting to me is that what I feel like I'm hearing you say within, adjusting, right? Because the question was challenging in different contexts, whatever. But it sounds like really what has been helpful for you is to just increase in self-awareness, which I don't. I say that because it's really interesting. I don't hear that a lot when you think, okay, how have you adjusted it? Well, we run it by other people, true, but then it sounds like you've just learned a lot of what, I guess the blind spots maybe, and expanding on that.
Yeah, and I think there's times that you walk out of the pulpit and you sometimes know that really was good. And that's not ego, it's just it.
Yeah.
There's other times when you go, that's awful, and the people who are telling me is good are just being nice. And you need to remember that they are just being nice. It was awful. And how do I not do that again?
That's good. Yeah. What's the saying? You're not as good as your best compliment, and you're not as bad as your worst critic.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in between, and yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, don't be a perfectionist, but make excellence a very high value, so that whatever is being done doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want it to be excellent. I sometimes watch online services from people and I think, dear God, did they look at this? Because their church will actually grow better if this doesn't show.
Well, explain that, because that is a fine line for a lot of ministry leaders, especially, right? When it comes to, I'm not talking about their online service, right? Because I think we're all still learning post-COVID, but whatever. But like I've had this conversation at length with others when it comes to the perfectionism versus maybe justifying that as, we're just trying to pursue excellence.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that you have to look at, and you have to get honest with yourself, is, are you a control freak? Are you real autocratic in how you lead? And honestly, autocratic leadership was encouraged years ago, but we live in a culture where autocratic leaders are going to go down in flames. You have to have ability to collaborate. You still need to be strong if you're the senior leader, but you need to be collaborative, and not every idea needs to come from you. You need to be able to embrace and give credit to other people who have the idea that now works, and be okay with that. And yet what you have to look at is, are we just doing this and not putting the effort in? And maybe you're trying to do too many things. As a church, it's far better to do 5 things pretty well than to do 10 things and none of them are done well.
Yeah. Well, so that's actually a perfect segue, because there's something I wanted to ask you to really pull out, because this was that you actually mentioned in a conversation with us, a couple of weeks ago. But you had said that you're actually great at empowering leaders, but not great at developing leaders. And so, especially when you're talking about just now, with others, can you pull out, because that really resonated with me, but pull out the difference between the two, because I think the common misconception is that, any leadership setting, that empowering and developing are the same. And if I just give them a job, I'm doing that. So can you pull the difference out for us?
Oh yeah. When I was a senior associate at a large church in Florida years ago, and the senior pastor, we had hired a new youth pastor fresh out of college. Didn't have a clue what he was doing, because the college he went to, he got some great theology, but not very much practical of how do you do the day-to-day of being a youth pastor. So he went into this senior pastor who was one of the major leaders in the denomination, very successful, but he led the way I'm talking about. He empowered people, but he didn't really develop people. And so he went into him almost in tears and said, Pastor, he said, I need you to help me to know how to be a youth pastor. And the pastor leaned up in his chair, looked at him and said, if I knew what to do, I wouldn't need you. Now get out of here and go do what I hired you to do. And so basically, fortunately, that young man learned how to do it.
And that's how Jack Hayford took the. I'm just kidding. Keep going. This is his origin story. Now we know. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Like Fort Wayne, but that was Florida. I'm sorry.
That's true. Fort Wayne's part of his old stomping grounds.
Anyway, keep going.
But basically, this young man learned how to do it. But what was sad, his competency as a youth pastor became incredible. Built a huge youth group, but his character was weak, and he ended up in later years having real issues with money and misusing money because his character didn't get developed, because it was kind of the go get 'em tiger approach to developing a leader. And so that's kind of where I'm at too, because I'm not one who likes to get down into the details. I love the 30,000 foot altitude of vision, and then somebody else figure out how to make the vision work. And so when you do have a tendency to think visionary in how you function, you have to remember that most people aren't visionary and they need more help in how to get where they need to be. And there's a number of different iterations of what I'm getting ready to say that I went through some training a few years ago that really helped me get a clear picture of this. And basically, it's called the leadership square. And side one is basically I do, you watch. Side two is I do, you help. Side three, you do, I help. Side four, you do, I watch. And I've tried to implement that simple model more recently with leaders. And then what I've also realized is you get some leaders, when they come in, assess where they are. Are they where they need that first side? Are they at side two or side three? So you pick up where they are. You don't take someone who's ready to begin to lead and you just be alongside them and say, now I'm going to do this and you need to watch me do it, because they are already ready to be at another step. But assess where they are and lead them from that point so they can be fully successful. And also, don't expect people, if they have a little bit different way of how they're going to do it than how you would do it, but there's a good chance that what they're going to do could be successful, don't make them fit in your box.
That's good.
Cheer them on of how they're going to do it, even if it's not exactly how you would do it, because what you're wanting is the end result, not the method.
Yeah.
So the method doesn't matter near as much as the message. And so that's what I've tried to do in more recent years as I've had leaders come under me, is how do you do that? The other thing to me that's very important is building relationship. How do you have where they feel like you really care about them, they know that, and you realize that they care about you because you've cultivated, and see where that is. If it's a situation where you need to be some level of a spiritual mentor or father, begin to assume that role well. If it's more of a peer relationship, be a peer with them, but sort through where it needs to be and make sure that the relationship is more important than the job you're trying to develop.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good.
Bill, you talk a lot about self-awareness. And I think in this, especially in what we're just talking about, developing leaders, is how do you kind of develop that self-awareness to look at some of those leaders, again, because we've all been doing this for a while now, to say there's just sometimes that you have to step in and say this is not the right position for you, or the right ministry for you. And then the other times, how do you say, okay, so I've seen the giftings in you. How do I develop those things? Like, how do you have that self-awareness, but then also the awareness of the people that you're working with to say, maybe this isn't it. Maybe this,
maybe it's singles ministry.
Maybe it's singles ministry.
Yeah. And it's funny, there are some principles and practices that are transferable to any ministry. There's other things that are not as transferable, and there are giftings that fit better. And I think one of the things that I'm not good about that probably is good is doing more with assessments with people to try to discern what are some of their natural abilities. I tend to do that more from just conversation and watching them, because I also have some skepticism about some assessments, because if it creates a pigeonhole instead of a vantage point, then that becomes a problem, because sometimes assessments are not fully accurate because they are based on certain criteria that may not fit exactly how it's being used as an assessment. So there's a balance in all that. But I do think that what you have to do is really begin to look and see, what are you asking a person to do, and how do you help them discover. And one of the things I try to do with my staff that work with me is find out what's their passion, and try to know that before I hire them. And what I'm also learning, and this is a biggie, because I tend to think from a visionary perspective, I've tended to assume that everybody has a visionary perspective. That's not true.
That's good.
And some of your best staff members are not visionary leaders. They're more servant oriented, and they're more doers that just need you to say, here's a direction to go in, and they can run with it and do well. But if you try to force them to be visionary, it's going to get awkward and uncomfortable, because that's not who they are. And so I think, again, you have to look at, who am I dealing with? What's their strengths? How do their strengths fit with the assignment? And then, for the most part, try to fit the assignment with the strengths. But also understand that sometimes you have jobs that just have to be done. And it isn't bad for us to occasionally have to do something we don't enjoy doing, but it needs to be done, because that also helps build the persistence and perseverance. If you know, this just has to be done, so somebody's got to do it. I don't know that I fully agree with the philosophy that when you have a new staff member, they all ought to clean toilets for a week when they get in there. I think some of that's stupid. But basically, I think at the same time, there's times that if there's nobody else to clean the toilet, then you need to go clean it.
Right.
So I think it's more of a practical than it is a training field.
Well, and you can see if a person has a servant's heart to be, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, exactly. I don't need to send them through the gauntlet to make sure that, that's been refined. That's pretty good.
You guys are all too young for this, but years ago, big deal was master's commissions, and I can't remember what they were called in Foursquare, but where it was kind of the gap year for students who millennials that didn't know yet what they wanted to do. So it was a great place for them to come. And sadly, a lot of churches turned that into slave labor to get the stuff done nobody else wanted to do. So it really wasn't developing them as leaders. And supposedly we were teaching them character because they did learn how to clean toilets. And we didn't. A lot of those kids, unfortunately, went away from the church.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with a potential intern this week, and I said that was one of the things I said was, we want to teach you skills for life and ministry, not just have you as a slave that does stacking chairs and those things. So
I'm glad you guys both said that, because that's having run something similar to the Master's Commission. In fact, Foursquare called it the ELN. We talked about it a little bit on with Susie Jenin. It was Emerging Leaders Network. That was one of the things that you almost had to deprogram some leaders within that to go, this is not the grunt work. This is, yes, we are going to be doing stuff. But at the same time, we're not going to ask them to do anything that we wouldn't do ourselves. Right. And so I remember I still am, when it comes to with interns, I am just so anti-busy work. Like, if there's nothing to do, just go. You know what I mean? Like, and
absolutely.
I remember one time, so I was off doing something. I wasn't at the church, whatever. And we had 3 interns, and there was apparently nothing for them to do. And so the youth pastor time took it on himself to say, well, I just have them reordering your bookshelf in alphabetical order. And I said, no, A, don't touch my bookshelf. Like, cause now I'm not gonna know where anything is. I said, but B, that's not even stewarding their time and stewarding their gift mix well as well. And so I really appreciate that. I know exactly what you're talking about, because that can be used. Used for the forces of evil, I think.
Yep.
Because it creates exactly what you're talking about. I can think of several who have walked away because we showed them that ministry is not loving, is not kind, is, you know what I mean? It's just the work that nobody wants to do. So
there's one more subject, if we've got just a couple more minutes.
Absolutely.
that I am thinking about, that I think is probably for me the most painful thing of being a pastor. And that is when people come up to you and say, Pastor, you're wonderful. We love you, but we just want to go someplace else because we feel like we're not getting fed and we need to go someplace where we can be fed.
Yes.
And I want to look at them and say, you dip.
We're about to get our second beep.
Let's beep it right now.
So
beep
basically, what it is, and ironically, because I've been through divorce, I also feel like I've been through 1,000 other divorces over all these years of ministry.
That's good. Yeah.
Because that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
You feel like I've poured into your life. I've been there when you were sick, when your family was struggling. We've helped you. We've done this. We've done that. I could go down the checklist. And now because there's a church down the street that has a better circus, you're going to go. And so basically, I don't know how you ever get to where that doesn't hurt. I think what you have to do is reach a point to where you understand you are building the kingdom, and there are going to always be people who have not come to a place where they really want to grow. And so as a result, they're not going to always stick with you.
Yeah.
And so how do you minister through hard times when you want to slap them and send them away, and yet you don't? And how do you also let them go because it'd be dysfunctional for them to stay? And then realize that for every one of those people that leave, I can tell you 10 people that have been incredibly loyal, part of our family, that have supported through thick and thin. But the problem is when someone is rejected, they're not really rejecting you, but that's what it feels like. And so you have to process that rejection. I think for me, at least, that's probably the number one pain of doing ministry.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think, one, I heard a pastor talk about it and say when somebody said, "Oh, I haven't, I'm not growing or whatever," he's like, "Awesome, let me see your notes from the last 5 weeks," and he's like, "And see what you're not getting." But the other thing I think for me often, and I think partly because I've grown up in ministry, my parents were pastors and all of those type of things, that I tend to almost be careless in the fact, like, if people want to leave, I'm like, fine, leave. Like, I'm sure, like, there's a better fit for you is kind of my perspective. And I actually believe that, but it can come off as me not being like caring, or they're like, "Oh, well, you didn't really care about us anyway." And I'm like, "Well, no, you told me that you're not growing and there's another place for you. Like, go find that place."
Yeah.
And so I think it's, again, finding that balance, and I'm not great at it because I'm just like, all right, see
it's hard because it feels personal whether they mean for it to be. And one of the things that I've tried to do when it happens is say, okay, God, help me discern. Do they really need to go someplace else? And people generally pull the God card on you when they're going to do this.
Every time.
Leading.
There's a form letter out there, I think, for sure, that they copy paste and send the same thing.
And what I've learned, I had a couple one time that pulled the God card on me. God's leading us somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And I just said, God, speak to me. And I felt God saying, no, I'm not. And I just said to them, you just pulled the God card on me, and it's hard to answer that, but I'm going to tell you this. I know God too, and I don't believe he's telling you. I don't bear witness with that. I don't believe that's what he's telling you.
Oh, good.
And I don't believe you should leave. And I said, trust me, I let people go all the time, but I don't feel like you should. So I just asked you to pray into it. They ended up not leaving. Wow. And then a couple of years later, they moved to another town and went away. And there's still been a very healthy connection because I took the risk of calling them out on the God card. And it was truly that God wasn't calling them away. It was they'd gotten hurt by somebody else. Yeah. That's the other problem is frequently it's not something you've done. It's somebody else in the church they don't like.
That's right.
And so basically, but you get the brunt because you're the pastor. And so I think those are the things that God just has to help us sort through. And then you've got to find people that you have confidence in that you can process with so that you process it so you don't get bitter.
So I know this is something for all of us, right? I know that we all, this is personal. Some are walking through it even as we speak potentially. I mean, we've had with you in the last few months, same thing. And something that you said, Bill, even earlier to draw back is, to remembering that even the good, right? It's not about you.
Yeah.
And often what's going on is it's not about me as the leader. Although
Yeah.
I'm the lightning rod and the easy target, and that's fine. The trick, like you said, and I can also bear witness with Dustin and what he's talking about of what it, for me, it almost becomes a defensive mechanism for me to go, I'll just be callous about this and I'll believe that lie. For me, it is that replaying tape in my head that I've always had of everybody leaves at some point. And this is, I'm just going to accept it. But something that Lauren Holtberg, who I know we all know together, had said, years ago, that just has stuck with me, is that regardless of if they go, and sometimes, like you said, you same thing, like, I'm not going to chase anybody kind of a thing, but that you still leave the door open relationally. And that's one of the things I always make sure to include in my form email reply, right? Of, I mean it when I say, I bless you, we bless you, we love you, but that we are always open and available to you relationally. And it's been really interesting as I've taken on that, several years ago, the reconciliation that I've been able to be a part of. And that doesn't always mean that people come back to the church. Like, it's just that the relationship is reconciled. I can think of several in the last couple of years where the Lord told me, you are the one that needs to go to them. I didn't even do anything wrong. Like, I'll own my stuff, but like, there's some things that's like, this isn't my fault, kind of a thing, but that once again, that's what I signed up for, right? As the leader and the pastor, to go and initiate that. And, it's not fun, but it's, it comes with the territory.
And I think what's important is to process it and then let it go. And if there's somebody you can process with, now I'll give you a piece of very ungodly advice of a way you could process it. With social media, you could go to their Instagram, their Facebook page, and then say what you wanted to say in person. You can look at them and say, this is bullshit. And then you're going to feel better, and you'll be able to release them. Because sometimes, it's what I said earlier, you don't let your emotions in the driver's seat, but they're in the car. And sometimes you got to let them have a way to get out. Good. And that doesn't mean you're an ungodly person because you let your emotions be expressed.
That's good.
It's where you end. It's not where you start with your emotions that matters. Then you go back to God and say, God, I know I probably shouldn't have done that, but it sure does feel good to have it out of my system.
Yeah.
I love that.
Of course you do.
Absolutely.
So
good.
Now, if I lose my credentials over this, we'll have a different conversation.
I'll give you mine.
So
you're gonna have a stack of them sitting on your desk as everyone's
Bill,
like, "No, thank
Bill,
you."
let's be honest. I don't think you want Dustin's credentials. Let's just be real.
I'm just saying, if that makes you lose your credentials, then I should have lost mine years ago.
No, well, like I said, we're all a work in progress, right?
Absolutely.
I think this whole part of the conversation is the intro. I don't know. We'll see. All right, let me get you out on this, Bill, because we've talked a lot about resiliency, the hard stuff, especially in walking through it. Yeah. Why don't we end on the bit of encouragement? So what is it? Yeah. And you've talked a little bit about this, but I'm curious if there's anything else that you're seeing, or just in general, what is actually encouraging and inspiring you about what you're seeing in ministry moving forward?
I can tell you exactly what it is. I'm excited about the four of you and others that I know in the younger age bracket, and even some younger than you guys that are coming.
They're definitely out there. Yes.
Yes, and both males and females. I'm glad, and I'm also glad that Foursquare is waking up to we need to be multi-ethnic. And I just think there's some wonderful things happening that encourage me for the future. And my thing is everything I can do to encourage the young leaders God's put in my life. I want to do that to cheer on what God's doing, because he's raising up the generation that I believe that it's time for another great awakening. And I believe that you guys are part of that, along with, I really have high hopes for what's going to happen with both millennials and Gen Z, for God to do a powerful work through them, because the authenticity that is such a desire there is going to drive people to God, and God will reveal himself. So to me, that's the exciting thing, is how do I help release the younger generations to be everything God's called you to be? And kudos to all of you for what you're willing to do.
Well, thank you. That's very gracious, but I want to say thank you to you also for being there to be the support, and even just passing on, like you said, just the hard-earned wisdom. It's another way to say it, really, that you have gleaned. It's been humbling to actually to be under that, and to see as you lead others, but also too, it's just been so beneficial as a leader who has received that as well, and seeing how God has pivoted you even further within that moving forward. We're grateful for you, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. No, thanks.
This one's gonna be saved on my desktop, I think, for a while.
Yeah.
I think it's funny you called it a desktop still, so you're showing your age a little bit.
Saying my desktop folder.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, Dustin's just trying to relate to me.
Well, this is a podcast that's, you actually could just save it in your phone. That's fine. Listen, if we're not giving each other a hard time, then are we actually showing
we
love?
Love each other.
Let's be real.
That's
Let's be real.
Chad,
well, Bill, once again, thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Bill,
for your time. Thank you for this. This is incredible. I know this is going to help a lot of people, and maybe even pull out some things that they've wrestled with themselves. So thank you again for your time.
No, appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
It was awesome.
So that was amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
Half man, half amazing.
I've never heard that before.
I was this many days old when I heard that for the first time. That's incredible. Awesome. Listen, so AJ and I were talking before. For me, we mentioned this before, he has been through so much. Like, just to know, even at the time that I've known him, he's been through a lot of not just ministry, but life stuff. But he never holds himself at this spot of like, well, I've got it figured out and here you go, kind of a thing. It's very much from a place of humility of, no, I got it wrong. And this is what I learned. And I've just always appreciated that about Bill. And it really, really shows through in this interview.
And I don't really know Bill. Like, this is probably the first actual conversation I've had. And so that's why part of the reason I was quiet, because I'm like, I don't know this guy, but he's freaking brilliant. But I just his wisdom, but also not in a way of, as you were saying, I'm not just saying like, yeah, I know this and you guys should figure your crap out. Like, I don't know, that's really good.
I really appreciate the fact that he looks at the generations coming, and he's not just like, oh, I ran my race and I'm good, but he is actively trying to give away what he has learned the hard way back to others, to maybe help some of us not do it that way. Or if we have done it the hard way, he's right alongside saying, come on, we can keep going. Let's do this. And it seems like he has just as much energy as when I first met him. Passion for ministry is huge. So
yeah, that's good.
Good time.
That's good stuff. Well, hopefully everyone has been able to pull some great stuff out of there. I mean, there's a lot. And like Dustin, like you said, we're gonna save this one, regardless of where we save it. We're gonna save it, and for sure.
Apparently not on my desktop. I'll save it to my phone or whatever.
All right. Well, we want to say thank you to Bill for giving us his time and, man, all that wisdom. Such good stuff. If you want to connect further with Bill, we've made ways available to do so in the episode show notes. And if you want to connect with us further, support the podcast, or sign up for future show updates, just go to withouthatingit.com to get started. And if this is your first time listening, don't forget to subscribe to Ministry Without Hating It wherever it is that you get your podcasts, so you don't miss out on future episode releases. Thanks again for listening, guys. We'll see you next time.
See ya.